Day 2 of the NHL Draft is over. In the video I posted late last night reviewing the first round, I said that the first round was pretty disappointing due to the lack of trades. I mean, sure, we had teams swapping picks, moving up and down in the draft, but outside of that, there was nothing. But Day 2 of the NHL Draft definitely made up for that. We have a ton of trades to break down today. There is one deal that we're still waiting for details on. Early this morning, there was multiple reports all but confirming that Jacob Trouba to Detroit was happening and that it would likely get done at some point today. We really don't know any details outside of the fact that the Rangers are retaining salary. So if that deal does in fact get done at some point today, you can expect a separate video where I break down that trade later on. With that all being said though, let's go ahead and talk about some trades that we do know the full details on. First up, the Washington Capitals sent restricted free agent Beck Malenstyn to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for a 2024 second round draft pick. Sort of surprised by this one. Beck Malenstyn is 26 years old. He's a big winger, played fourth line minutes for the Capitals this past season, led the team in hits, so he's very physical, chipped in a little bit of offense with 21 points in 81 games. His underlying numbers aren't great. I guess the Buffalo Sabres really thought they needed to add some physicality to their bottom six, get a little bit tougher to play against, which is definitely fair, but I think the cost of acquisition here was pretty expensive for the kind of player Beck Malenstyn is. I like this trade for the Capitals. The second round draft pick was 43rd overall. The Capitals used that pick to select a defenseman Cole Hutson, who is the younger brother of Montreal Canadiens prospect Lane Hutson. Like his older brother, Cole Hutson is an undersized defenseman with a ton of skill, should make a very nice addition to the Washington Capitals prospect pool. Moving on now to the next trade, this was the real blockbuster of the day, and it kind of came out of left field. Utah has acquired defenseman Mikhail Sergachev from the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for defenseman JJ Mosier, prospect Connor Geekie, who was selected 11th overall by the Coyotes in 2022. The Lightning also received a 2025 second round draft pick and a 7th round draft pick from earlier today. This is a big time get for Utah. Sergachev immediately becomes their number one defenseman. I said in a couple of videos before the offseason began that I was expecting Utah to be very aggressive this offseason and that the new ownership was going to want to make a splash, want to make a big first impression, and that is exactly what happened here. Sergachev has a cap hit of $8.5 million and is signed at that number through the 2030-31 season. It feels like Sergachev has been around forever, but he's still only 26 years old. He did miss a large chunk of this season due to a pretty brutal leg injury, but he's only 1 year removed from the best season of his career. In 2022-23 with the Tampa Bay Lightning, he put up 64 points in 79 games and actually led the Tampa Bay Lightning in ice time that season. Throughout his career so far, he's kind of been playing in the shadow of Victor Hedman. I think going to a team like Utah is a great opportunity for Sergachev to step out of that shadow and really establish himself as one of the NHL's elite defensemen. Utah is the team that had an absolute embarrassment of riches in terms of draft picks and prospects. They could easily afford to go out and make a big splash like this. I think this is a very exciting trade for them. And looking at this deal from the point of view of the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think it's pretty clear that one of their goals today was to free up cap space, get more cap flexibility heading into free agency. This isn't the only trade they made today that we're going to talk about in this video. The Lightning did not retain any salary as part of this deal, so Sergachev's entire cap hit of $8.5 million comes off the books for Tampa. JJ Mosier, who was part of the return, is a restricted free agent and is in need of a new deal, but he's not going to get anything close to $8.5 million. After making this trade, I think Tampa Bay's left side is still in pretty good shape. You have Victor Hedman, they brought back Ryan McDonough, and now you have JJ Mosier as well. That's a decent left side still. You add a prospect in Connor Geekie, who, like I said, was an 11th overall pick by Arizona back in 2022. I think he immediately becomes the best prospect in Tampa Bay's system. And you also get a couple of draft picks, one of which being a 2025 second. So Tampa now has 2 second round draft picks in 2025, which they could use to trade for a player or to trade up in the 2025 draft, or just use the draft picks and try and replenish their prospect pool a little bit, which is one of the weaker prospect pools in the league. Overall, I think it's a solid return for Tampa Bay. It's going to be really interesting to see what they decide to do with this newfound cap space. It was recently reported that despite the fact that they now have more cap space, Julien Brisebois did not bump up his offer for Steven Stamkos, and he also said that he's not closing the door on anything, but it doesn't sound like the Lightning and Stamkos are going to be able to come to terms on a new deal, so it sounds like Stamkos is as good as gone. Elliot Friedman did report that Tampa Bay is now eyeing Jake Gensel, and he's one of their main main targets heading into free agency. It would be pretty crazy if Tampa Bay is the team that ends up landing him. They now have the cap space to be able to pull it off. We'll see if it happens. Moving on now to the next trade, another deal involving Utah, as they have acquired defenseman John Marino from New Jersey, along with a 5th round draft pick from earlier today in exchange for a couple of 2nd rounders. So Utah really bolstered their defense today. John Marino is a right shot top 4 defenseman who is very good defensively, can kill penalties, not someone who's going to put up a ton of points or quarterback the power play, but he does have some offensive elements to his game. He's a decent puck mover, has had 25 or more points in a season 3 times. He's on a very fair contract as well, signed for 3 more seasons at a cap hit of $4.4 million. You look at what Utah's top 4 could look like next season: Sergachev, Marino, Durzi, Valimaki. That doesn't sound too bad at all. All of those players are relatively young as well. Marino is actually the oldest of the 4 and he's only 27. I really like what Utah is doing. They got a lot better today and they're probably not done yet. They still have over $28 million in projected cap space according to Cap Friendly. This is a team that I'm definitely expecting to be in the mix for a playoff spot next season. And looking at this deal from the point of view of the New Jersey Devils, I think with Dougie Hamilton coming back next season and Simon Nemec likely taking on a bit bigger of a role, that made John Marino expendable for them. So they free up some cap space here. They got into the 2nd round earlier today. They didn't have their own 2nd rounder, so they got one by making this trade, and now they have 3 2nd rounders next year. The Devils are another team that has a ton of cap space. I'm expecting them to be very active in free agency. Moving on now to the next trade. This is the other Tampa deal that I was referring to earlier. The Los Angeles Kings have acquired forward Tanner Jeannot from Tampa in exchange for a 2025 2nd and a 4th rounder from earlier today. So Tampa frees up even more cap space here. Tanner Jeannot had 1 year left on his deal at a cap hit of around $2.6 million. I remember when they acquired him back in February of 2023. It's a trade that was heavily criticized. They gave up a lot. I believe it was Cal Foot, a 1st, a 2nd, a 3rd, a 4th, and a 5th. And as a lot of us expected, it's a deal that really just did not age well for Tampa Bay, but they're able to get out from under the final year of his contract by making this trade and recoup some assets, getting the 4th rounder from earlier today and a 2nd for next year. And to quickly talk about this deal from the point of view of the LA Kings, I don't think Tanner Jeannot is going to move the needle for them very much, if at all. It seems like GMs are really still holding on to that 24-goal rookie season he had back in 2021-22, but at this point I think it's safe to say he's probably never going to get back to that level. Don't get me wrong, still a useful player. He's a big, physical, 4th-line winger who likes to throw his weight around and drop the gloves, good forechecker. I do feel like a 2nd round draft pick is a bit expensive to give up for a guy like Tanner Jeannot, but I guess that's just the going rate for guys cut from this cloth, as we also saw Beck Malenstyn dealt to Buffalo for a 2nd, which we talked about earlier. Next up, we saw the Washington Capitals acquire goaltender Logan Thompson from the Vegas Golden Knights in exchange for a couple of 3rd round draft picks. Felt really bad for Logan Thompson. He was actually there at the draft at the Sphere in Vegas doing a signing as a member of the Golden Knights. There was a picture of him in a Vegas jersey behind the table he was doing the signing at. People were getting him to sign Vegas cards and jerseys, and he was traded in the middle of that, but he still ended up following through with the signing. After the Washington Capitals traded Darcy Kemper for Pierre-Luc Dubois, they only had 1 goaltender signed through next season, and that was Charlie Lindgren, so they had to acquire a goaltender at some point this summer, and they needed a cheap one at that, as the Washington Capitals are right up against the cap, so they get that done here, acquiring Logan Thompson, who has a cap hit of just $767,000. He's a UFA at the end of next season. Honestly, pretty surprised that all it took to acquire Logan Thompson was 2 3rd round draft picks, considering how cheap his cap hit is and how solid his numbers have been throughout his NHL career so far. I figured he would have a little bit more value than this, but I guess the market for goalies is always pretty weird. Definitely a really solid pickup for Washington though. They now have a really good budget tandem heading into next season of Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson at a combined cap hit of a little under $1.9 million. And talking about this deal from the point of view of the Vegas Golden Knights, I was a little bit confused at first. They're a team that's right up against the salary cap, so I didn't really understand why they were trading a very cheap backup goaltender who's been good for them over the last few years, leaving Adin Hill as their only goaltender signed through next season. But we learned pretty quickly that this move was a precursor to an additional move, which we will talk about now, as the Vegas Golden Knights acquired Alexander Holtz and goaltender Akira Schmidt from the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Paul Cotter and a 2025 3rd round draft pick. So the Golden Knights quickly get a goaltender back in Akira Schmidt, who I think is a downgrade over Logan Thompson, but he is younger at just 24 years old. currently a restricted free agent, and his next contract should come in very cheap. Along with Schmidt, the Vegas Golden Knights acquire Alexander Holtz, which was a bit shocking to see. Holtz played in all 82 games for the Devils this past season, but in a very limited role, fourth line minutes, still was able to manage 16 goals, getting those minutes. He's not really the kind of player that's suited for a fourth line role, isn't overly physical. His defensive game leaves a whole lot to be desired, but there's definitely a lot of offensive potential there. He has a lethal shot. He was selected 7th overall by New Jersey back in 2020 for a reason. Looking at Vegas's depth chart heading into next season, obviously they can still add guys through trades and free agency, but as of now, it looks like, based on their depth chart, that he's going to get an opportunity to play a lot higher in the lineup in Vegas than he played in New Jersey, so maybe the Golden Knights are going to be able to get more out of Alexander Holtz than New Jersey was able to. I think this has the potential to be a really nice addition for Vegas, and looking at this deal from the point of view of the New Jersey Devils, after going out and getting Jake Allen at the deadline last year and then acquiring Jacob Markstrom about a week and a half ago, it makes sense that they decided to trade Akira Schmidt. He wasn't going to factor into their plans at the NHL level. When it comes to Alexander Holtz, he's a guy that Devils fans became pretty frustrated with this past season in terms of how he was utilized by New Jersey. I think it's pretty clear that New Jersey was just ready to move on and they did not plan on using him in a larger role next season, or they wouldn't have made this trade. It's not really a shock to see Holtz moved. What I am surprised by is that his value is really this low. I mean, Paul Cotter in a third is not a crazy return by any means. Paul Cotter is a decent depth forward who's still relatively young, 24 years old, has shown some scoring touch in the past, might end up being a pretty useful player for the Devils. He's cheap too, 2 more years at a cap hit of just $800K, but certainly doesn't have the kind of upside that someone like Alexander Holtz has. I like this deal for Vegas. It's a low risk, high reward move in my opinion. Moving on now to the next trade, the Pittsburgh Penguins acquired centerman Kevin Hayes along with a 2025 second from St. Louis in exchange for future considerations. So a pure cap dump here by St. Louis. Kevin Hayes still has 2 more years left at a cap hit of a little under $3.6 million because Philadelphia is still retaining salary. Solid bit of work here for Pittsburgh in my opinion, getting a second round draft pick to take on the final 2 years of Kevin Hayes' deal. Hayes is still an alright two-way middle six center. He's only 1 year removed from a 54-point season back in 2022-23 with Philly. He was elite in the faceoff dot this season with St. Louis, winning 54% of his draws. He's a guy that I think can come in and play a role similar to the role played by Jeff Carter over the last couple of seasons. And now finally finishing out the video with the last trade that we have to break down, the Toronto Maple Leafs have acquired the UFA rights to Chris Tanev in exchange for Max Ellis and a 2026 6th round draft pick. Obviously a very small return here for Dallas, but this is almost always the case when it comes to teams trading away a player's UFA rights. If the GM doesn't plan on bringing the player back, or they don't think they're going to be able to come to an agreement, you might as well try and get something in return. It's been reported that Chris Tanev is Toronto's main target in free agency, so by making this trade, they get exclusive negotiating rights for a couple of days before free agency opens on July 1st. So he's technically not a Leaf yet, but I can't imagine the Leafs would have made this trade if they don't think they're going to be able to get something done. If he does end up signing in Toronto, which I'm fully expecting him to, I think Chris Tanev is a beautiful fit for the Leafs, exactly what they need. A top 4 right shot defenseman who is an analytical darling, one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire NHL. He's the definition of a shutdown guy, a matchup nightmare. In the playoffs with Dallas and over 100 plus minutes on the ice against McKinnon and Eichel, Dallas led 6-1 in those minutes Chris Tanev played against those superstars. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see what the contract ends up looking like. Chris Tanev is 34 years old, but even if it's a 4 or 5 year deal, this is a guy who doesn't rely on speed or skill to really be effective. He relies on his smarts, his defensive IQ, and usually those are the kind of players whose games age very well and are effective right up until the end of their career. I really like this move by the Maple Leafs to ensure they get a deal done with their main target heading into free agency. So that is going to wrap up today's video, breaking down all the notable trades involving NHL players that took place today during day 2 of the NHL draft. As always, I want to know what you guys are thinking, especially if your team was involved in any of the trades we covered in this video. Let me know how you're feeling down below in the comments. If you made it all the way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself and you had fun watching the draft, then be sure to leave this video a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does actually help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all again soon.